All right, you miserable accursed, listening to the curse of politics on a family day, holiday. How dare you? Anyway, here we are. Most of us anyway. Deb Hutton, Scott Reid, myself, we're here. Jordan Leichnitz is not with us today. She's found a part of Morocco where the hash is better, but the internet is worse. And so just the group of us today. But I noticed, that I didn't get any of my normal clipping services this morning, all the things that normally summarize the news for you. No, things around. I think we must be the hardest working people in show business, Deb.
Absolutely. And happy Family Day to my newfound family on this podcast.
Oh, come on. One drunk uncle, one drunk cousin. What a family this would be.
I am from Listowel, so I'm used to it.
All right, let's get into it. We have fresh data from over the weekend. So let's start with that. Today's Relay Strategies polling is brought to you by Enbridge Gas, reliable, affordable natural gas to heat your homes and power our economy. So what do we know today? Not a whole lot, but something. So slippage, but no cracks. So Ford is at their lowest point in terms of vote intention at 47. Liberals are at 26. NDP are at 20. Schreiner is at 8. And I would say that just looking through the data that there's that kind of slippage for Ford on most of the indicators, personal and issue. One thing I would say is it really illustrates the power of the ballot question and framing campaigns and the importance of the early call. If you look at what's happening on the issue set, if this election was about healthcare or education, it might actually be close because Ontarians think that the three parties are relatively close together on those issues, and Ford is effectively tied with the NDP on healthcare and tied with both the NDP and the Liberals. On education, and tied with both the Liberals and the NDP on healthcare. But on dealing with Trump, he has a 23-point advantage over the nearest competitor, which is Crombie. And on the cost of living, he has a 12-point advantage over his nearest competitor, which is Stiles and the NDP. So on the issues that the election is about, the Conservatives have a commanding lead, and the other parties have not been successful in either changing what the election is about to more comfortable terrain for them or competing on the terrain that the election is about. Deb, what do you make of all that?
10 days to go, looks pretty solid, and I don't think we've seen the onslaught of Conservative ads yet. So I'm not concerned about the slippage. As you say, it's slippage, not cracks. I know we'll talk about debates because there's a big one tonight, but I was not impressed by the opposition on Friday in the sort of early mini debate held in North Bay. So 10 days is not a long time. It's not impossible for people to move those numbers, but it's pretty rare to see that much movement.
Getting late in the day.
Scott?
Yeah, obviously it's getting late in the day. I think there's two interesting things. One is I'm not certain that the last few days, and these numbers demonstrate, like let's just say these numbers are even just for the sake of discussion. Let's not pretend that they're the marginal movement we see is movement. Let's just say they're more or less the same. Then it means that last week's intervention in Washington didn't gain Ford much, if anything. Maybe it froze the ballot question, as you say, and sort of kept it there, which is obviously critical. But it doesn't look like that thing is yielding results. And so one question for me is how much of that ballot question will we get in the next 2 weeks? Trump is so unpredictable. Does he crack off on us and attack us again the next 2 weeks? Or do we drift towards something that's a little bit more traditional in the close of the campaign? The second question in my mind is, what will the Conservatives do over the course of this next 2 weeks? Will they ride it out? Will they unleash advertising that's pro-Doug and try to seal the deal? Will they use their advertising to go after one or both of the parties? Will they try to segment, go after Marriott in downtown Toronto and Crombie everywhere else. Can you really do that very much other than digital right now? I'm not sure, you know. So I'll be curious, like, do they decide that they want to alter the relationship between Crombie and Styles and where they stand? Do the Conservatives put paid media behind stalling Crombie and trying to get her back down to 22, or do they just leave it? So I'll be watching that. If they turn their guns big time on Crombie, I think that will be interesting. That may tell us that there's more movement than we think, or more fear on their part of movement.
Well, I don't want to take advantage of the fact that Jordan isn't here, but it certainly seems like the Liberals remain, to the extent that there is a prime competitor to Ford, the Liberals remain that. They're higher in the polls. They've got more reach around the province. And frankly, one dynamic, maybe I'll just throw into the mix. I know we're going to move to federal politics in a second, but there's definitely increasing federal Liberal fortunes in the province of Ontario. And a lot of that's built around Carney. And a lot of that's built around Carney's perceived ability on the Canada-US front. So all of that means there could be some spillage into Crombie's vote there too. So for all those reasons, I mean, I just see the NDP as flat as a pancake here on all these issues. And I assume Ford's going to keep his guns focused on Crombie. There is comfort and power in the ability to grow old and then grow older and remain in your own home. Hard to argue that. For so many seniors, it speaks to safety, confidence, and the ability to live with a sense of independence. I've lived these kinds of issues as a caregiver in my own family, and I've seen them play out in my friends' families. We have some of the best hospital care in the world in Canada, and wonderful community health services too. But even so, finding the right kind of care can be confusing, intimidating, and time-consuming. And that sometimes means our loved ones are not able to stay, to live, to thrive in the place they love best. I started telling stories last week about our presenting sponsor, TELUS Health, a Canadian company, and how through world-leading technology, they work to support and deliver better health outcomes. TELUS Health Home Thrive is one of those technologies. It's an innovative care navigation platform that transforms aging-in-place support for seniors and their caregivers. In collaboration with government and healthcare providers, Home Thrive seamlessly integrates public and community services, provides additional digital-first health and well-being solutions, as well as emotional support. It works. In a recent survey, caregivers reported less burnout. 56% of patients said Home Thrive helped them avoid hospitalization. 88% said it reduced their need to move from home to a senior living facility. And it's not too difficult to see how all of this has major impacts on reducing stress to the system and cost of care. But the point is home. As a perceptive someone once said, there's no place like it. Another good TELUS Health story to come next week.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I were doing their advertising, and I think there'll be a lot of it in the next 10 days or however long you can go before you hit writ day, I guess 8 days, I would be heavily focused on Doug and the Protect Ontario message and a little bit on Crombie, just to make sure she doesn't get up off the floor because, 2 or 3 points isn't going to kill them in terms of slippage. So I think you want to do a little bit against her. It makes the debate tonight important too. Not that I always put a lot of stock in debates. I don't think any of us do, but you don't want to have any residual movement on Crombie's part.
If Jordan was here, wouldn't she say that these relatively tied numbers, 6 points, I guess it's not really a tie, but that these numbers, the way they could play out in the NDP's favor is that the NDP's 20% is concentrated in below Bloor Street in Toronto, and they can win a handful of ridings. It's efficient, whereas the 26% for the Liberals is spread all across the GTA, probably all across the Golden Horseshoe, and pulling in 15% in a bunch of ridings elsewhere in the province, and might just make them second place everywhere. And do you have a view, Dave, as a pollster, as to what the Liberal Party needs to pull at in order to actually start banking seats? Isn't it 2 or 3% more? Don't you need to get to 28, 29 before they turn into seats?
Maybe higher. I think they need 5 points pretty much straight from the Conservatives. before they start winning any quantity of seats. But to your other point, though, the point Jordan might make, the NDP are actually down about 5 points from their 2022 result, and I think there's
Yeah.
a lot of seats in those 5 points.
That's scary for them.
Yeah,
It's very scary for them.
Okay, there was a debate. In the Northern debate occurred last Thursday, and I don't really want to spend any time talking about what happened in it because really, as we've seen from the data in the general atmosphere of the campaign, it didn't happen. But did either of you see anything in that debate that makes you interested about tonight's debate, which is the big show on all the networks? And did any of the characters do anything that made you think that maybe something could happen tonight? Scott?
Yes, I actually did. I thought a couple things. First of all, I did think the debate was interesting because we were all wrong, because we were all relying on our personal experience with the Northern debate. It was much more of an actual full structured debate than I expected. It wasn't as much of a Q&A session bear pit thing. Like they really kind of went at each other. It seemed like a structured debate. And so I thought that was helpful for the campaigns because it did give them more of a sneak preview of what to expect tonight. And so if you saw something you didn't like about your candidate's performance or something you thought might be hopeful, then you could say, all right, let's use the weekend to try to deal with that. I thought that Crombie had the best moment of the debate when she did her whole story about addictions. Like they had an addictions question. She got a little runway to talk about her own personal experience with her father and her mother and the story about living in a rooming house and what they had to deal with, which is not a story that I think has been well surfaced. It's, and I think it's very sympathizing and humanizing for her. So you might look for an opportunity to get that back out there on the bigger stage, although you don't want it to look inauthentic and forced. I also thought for Crombie, I saw a big note that I would make if I was debate prepping her to fix, because when Ford went after her record as mayor, she overreacted. She got too defensive. She started laughing and shaking her head, and it was distracting. It didn't look like a strong response, a rebuttal, or a dismissal. It looked instead like she was frazzled by it. So she's got to clean that up. She can't let him get under her skin. And then the final thing I noticed, which is got to be concerning for folks, is that when Marit takes the camera likes her, right? And so I think, if you're the other campaigns, you gotta put a stick in those spokes. You can't let her just play kissy face with the camera because she's too attractive, too telegenic a commodity.
All right, control yourself, Scott.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a Valentine's Day, and I was getting all candy hearts were floating across the screen.
Deb, what did you see on Thursday?
So a couple of things on Bonnie's performance. Her message was so full that I got nothing out of it. And, keep in mind, people might tune in at the beginning of tonight or at the beginning of Friday, unlike us, and sit through the whole thing. I couldn't tell you what her pitch was. Neither she nor Marit, in my view, made an effective case for why either of them, like so much in Bonnie's opening statement. So again, I don't know whether there's a opening statement tonight format or if they go right to topics, but she did not, in my view, make any case for why Bonnie Crombie and not Doug Ford. Secondly, point Scott made, Doug got under her skin. We talked on Friday about maybe Bonnie getting under Doug's skin or Marit getting under Doug's skin. Doug got under Bonnie's skin and she performed really poorly. There was one visual where the camera pulled back to the full stage and Bonnie's arm was like halfway across the stage pointing at Doug. There's I don't know if you guys are Modern Family fans, but there's an episode where Claire is running for local council and her kids keep, telling her she's got the pointy finger and stop doing the pointy finger. And it reminded me so much of Bonnie on Friday. So she does have some things to clean up. That's the good news for the Liberal campaign, the bad news for the Conservatives, because I would think Scott and I both noticed it. I think without a doubt, her campaign team is going to say, you gotta control your emotions when it comes to the Premier.
I didn't think that the Premier looked that sure-footed defending his record.
I thought so too. I thought he got the dynamic of the debate, which is why I mentioned that it was more of a structured debate. He was under fire the whole time, and I don't think he ever broke. But you could see him bending a little bit, and it'll be interesting to see if that dynamic repeats itself tonight. It's the kind of thing that could shave a couple points off. He didn't look as in command. He didn't look like he was letting the bullets bounce off him with as much ease.
He didn't take the bait, though. He did not.
Just for the record, and for obvious reasons, our sponsor CN wants to make something clear. Fentanyl moving across the US-Canada border in both directions is a heightened concern, but train isn't its preferred mode of travel. In the first 10 months of last year, Canadian customs agents seized 4.9 kilos of fentanyl on its way into Canada from the US. During that same period, US customs agents seized about 14.6 kilos of the drug coming from Canada to the United States. Now, it's already been widely reported that seizures on the Canada-US border barely amount to 1% of America's larger fentanyl problem. And as I said a moment ago, none of that fentanyl was hidden on a train. Nonetheless, CN is stepping up its contributions to border security. The railway works with customs agencies on both sides of the border, as well as the RCMP's Border Integrity Unit. It already uses a non-intrusive X-ray system under U.S. Customs supervision to detect anomalies in cargo shipments, people, or contraband, and a newer, higher efficiency system is in the works. One thing, though, contrary to popular belief, CN, or any other railway for that matter, cannot just open up a container on suspicion without a warrant. And CN doesn't just cooperate, it helps. In any case, the point is this. CN moves an enormous amount of material by rail to and from the United States and does it safely and legally to the benefit of both countries. Period. Okay, so you got one last shot. Let's go to core strategy. You got one last shot to make an impact. If you are one of these opposition leaders, are you trying to one last time turn the election to your issue? In the Liberals' case, for example, healthcare. Or are you trying to take him on his core issue? What are you trying to do today? I'm sort of down to maybe the Liberals or the NDP can convince people of one thing in the 10 days that are left. They can't convince them of 5 or 10. Forget all that platform stuff you're talking about, right? What is the one thing you can convince people of in the next 10 days? And what would you start at?
I think it's got to be healthcare. I don't know why all of them, Schreiner and Crombie in particular, continue to hammer away on the early election call. In my view, that's wasted air for them.
Well, if they're still talking about that, that is bizarre, but
They are.
yeah.
They are. I mean, wasn't that the strategy that they said out loud last week, Scott, for the Liberals? I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I don't know. They said that in one of those tweets, but that's not actually what she did. So who knows? But
Well, they did, though. They talked about, we should all be pulling together instead of being in this election campaign. And again, I think that's just wasted.
I to the degree to which they blow syllables on that, I think if you're the Liberals, if you're Crombie, you have to gamble that the heavy spade work of beating up on Doug will largely be done by Schreiner and Stiles. So I would do what I call in debate prep punch and pivot, right? Give him a shot as you drive by. Don't even address him. Just go, you know what, Doug, boom, whack him in the jaw. See if you can get him to respond angrily, but then just wheel to the camera and I think they need to bring something additional on healthcare. I don't think it's just listen, I was speaking with Rhonda in Thunder Bay, and this is her experience. I think the thing you have to bring, you hinted at this the other day, David, is, you know what? We probably all started to think and accept that you can't make it any better, that that's just the way it is. Well, it fucking doesn't have to be that way. You know what? If you choose a different leader, who says, sorry, I'm going to do less of other things and more of this thing because it matters more than anything else, then we can move the yardsticks on getting you a family doctor and making certain that emergency ward is open on Saturday. And I think maybe that, and it's not even as much a mix of here's my 3-point plan as it is you're probably, I just want to relight the lamp that if a political leader is elected, they can concentrate on a priority and make something happen. And Doug Ford hasn't and won't, but I will. And I think if they could try to get that psychology out, that might be helpful.
Okay. Is it too early to be bringing out, do you want to give him every seat in the ledge?
To
Do people believe that though?
Is
Who
it
don't
too
follow
early to be
things?
running on a strong opposition? Well, I mean, in a way saying, listen, obviously Ford's going to win this election, but don't you want people there to fight for healthcare because he doesn't give a shit about healthcare? Or don't you want people there to, um, I'm not an advocate of this strategy, but I've just seen it employed, and I'm just curious about what you think in a circumstance like this, whether there's ever some merit in conceding the obvious so that you have other ground to fight on.
I wouldn't, and here's why. I think
Yeah.
part of the frame of this campaign has been strength versus weakness, and I think that if you use that, it gets filtered out as weakness. There will be few people. I'm going to talk about this in my curse. There'll be few people watching 6 or 8 o'clock this debate, so they'll rely upon what others have said and memes and reels and so forth. And I don't think it's the place to make that play. I'd wait until the last week, and then I would dedicate a day or two to it, and hopefully maybe even the idea has been third parties planted by then. But I think I think all that it would project if you actually try to use the debate to do that. I fear that what it would project is not strategic voting, but it would project weakness, and I think that could be a problem, particularly for the Liberals. I think they'd look actually for either of them. I think it would look weak.
Right. All right. Let's flip to a do-over here. Do either one of you have a do-over?
I actually thought both Conservative Party federally and provincially performed well this weekend. Doug wasn't out a lot, but I mean, the debate I kind of lump into the last few days. I was a bit hard pressed to figure something out for a do-over. The best I came up with is I think we're getting close to talking process stories about the Premier's reluctance to talk to local media. So it's not necessarily a do-over. He left after the debate and didn't take his scrum. I just think the team has to be a bit cautious that doesn't become a story. Not that I think it'll be disastrous for them, but you don't need it. You don't need process stories when you've still got a strong message to drive that you want to drive.
They do tangentially appear to be paying no price for the edict that candidates can't go to all candidates meetings. Eh?
Yep.
0.
Yeah. You got a do-over, Scott? Or was the Liberal campaign perfect this weekend?
It was. I thought it was flawless. I thought that it was kind of the Rocky Marciano of election campaigns. I would just on that I thought maybe when I saw Ford pop up for the only time really on the weekend on Fox News, I wondered if it felt a little bit like going to the well one too many times. It did feel like, no, he played that card. Is it? But anyway, I'm probably wrong, and I'm probably looking at it too closely, which is always a danger in these campaigns, especially when nothing is happening. You start trying to zero in on like the tiniest crumb of events. My only do-over is one I already hinted at. I think off camera conduct in a debate is something that often candidates don't think that much about in prep, and it's important. Probably the finest, and you and I have talked about this on the pod before, the finest candidate I've ever witnessed with that is Trudeau, constantly conscious of his body, his posture, his relationship to the audience, whether he's speaking or not speaking. Sure. And I thought that in the Northern debate, when the camera and the mic were off of her, Crombie let her discipline fade, and in a way that is much more exaggerated on television and to the viewer than she would have, I imagine, thought. So when Doug's talking, and like here's like a very specific note for political leaders: when you are in a debate and you want to intervene or dismiss or disagree with your opponent, you have to barge in with both boots. A word won't do it. A sound won't do it. A syllable won't do it. You need to get in and force, because you have to think about the mechanics of television, audio and visual. You have to say something that's sustained enough that it forces the cameraman, the director in the booth, to move the camera to you, and that your mic comes up wholly, so that you're not in a situation where you just sound like all that people get is a disembodied voice or sound that's kind of bleeding on the margins. That sounds and looks weak. So when you're laughing or when you're going, no, that's not, right? That is not enough for the director to go to camera 3. It's not. when you say, Doug, that is wrong, and let me just talk to you and correct you. No, Doug, if you brought it up, then I'm going to correct you. Then they go to camera 3. So that would be my do-over, and I hope that lesson was absorbed on the weekend by Crombie.
And it's easier for me to say this than you guys, but it is particularly true, everything Scott said, when you're a female, without a doubt. You just sound like you're chirping from the other side.
Right. The Ontario Real Estate Association has been telling us that Ontario's housing crisis is pushing the dream of home ownership further and further out of reach for too many Ontario families, and that municipal development charges, or MDCs, are a big part of this problem. MDCs are intended to pay for growth-related costs that accompany new housing construction. Think roads, utilities, and water infrastructure. But increasingly, we've seen many municipalities treat MDCs like a source of general revenue, placing an unfair tax burden on home buyers by adding up to $135,000 to the price of an average home. Ouch! OREA understands that municipalities have struggled to keep up with the pace of growth. But with billions of dollars in revenue from MDCs remaining unspent, it is Ontario's homeowners who are on the hook for these excessive costs that are making it even harder to own a home. OREA has offered solutions, like allowing municipalities to offer water and wastewater as they do energy, amortized across the user base. Whatever the final solution may be, Ontario's municipalities must find approaches to generating revenue that does not involve passing costs down to consumers. To read OREA's plan on how to save the dream of home ownership, read their full election platform, A Home for Everyone 2025, at orea.com/platform. Okay, let's flip briefly to the federal scene here, where we had a hell of a big show by the Conservative Party on Saturday in Ottawa. I don't know what the final count was, but it was a pretty big room and it was pretty packed.
I looked it up.
Certainly
6,200 is the capacity, and they had it draped and stuff. So I'm guessing they got 4,000 or 5,000 there. It was a big room.
Yeah, I'm certainly not going to start questioning their ability to draw crowds.
No.
And Poilievre gave what cannot be denied to be a major repositioning speech of his candidacy, and tried to take off the table.
He denied it, though. Even as he did it, he's paused his speech to say, the media want you to believe that this is a re-engineering of my campaign. And it is not. Back to the re-engineering.
Right. And obviously tried to take off the table any notion that he might be weak on Trump or weak on these U.S. tariffs or insufficiently dedicated to Canada to defend it. So, I mean, I think that was the major purpose, is to appropriate the mantle of Canadian champion. Deb, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so, without a doubt. We talked, I think, my first week joining you guys about what I thought was not going to be a massive shift, but a change in tone and language. And I think that's what you saw, without a doubt. I mean, he doesn't have great appeal to a huge segment of population that had parked their vote with him. And so I do think there's a tone shift that needs to happen that becomes all the more important with the rise of Carney. So I think that's what you saw. But I really, as I said, I didn't have a do-over for it. I thought it was quite flawless.
Right. Scott, you wrote something that implied that you didn't think he was quite as comfortable as he wanted to be in his new clothes.
I thought so. I thought there were a couple of things. First of all, let's give them full due. I thought the event looked spectacular. Like the formal stagecraft of it, the visuals, the giant red Canada, the red flag. He wore a red tie. So don't tell me this isn't a pivot. He wore a red fucking tie on Flag Day. Okay, so this was sort of John Diefenbaker. I'm sorry, man, but the fight is over. The red ensign is dead and buried. Okay, like we are 100% wrapping ourselves in the maple leaf. A joked he wrapped himself so hard in the maple leaf his antlers nearly came off. But I thought, there were three parts to the speech, and it was really a well-constructed speech, I thought. Like, if you looked at it and you think about both in terms of how it's composed and also the strategy of it, really well structured, right? Like, First, I'm going to embrace Canada, and I'm putting my eyeballs onto my first opponent, which is Donald Trump. Second, putting my eyeballs on my second opponent, which is Mark Carney, not Chrystia Freeland, not anybody else, Mark Carney. And then third, here's some new policy. Here's some stuff that reinforces all of that, and hopefully tries to like package it up and puts me into a specific place where I have advantages on these critical questions. And so I thought the speech was well constructed. I thought the event looked beautiful. I thought, though, that there are a couple of questions that arose. One, he's trying out a new 10 minutes of material like a stand-up comic, and I did not think he looked as commanding and as comfortable with the new Up With Canada stuff. It was all fine, don't get me wrong, and I'm not sort of, it didn't look like cosplay, it didn't look like it was inauthentic, but he didn't look as comfortable. When he got into the run at the end, which more closely resembles his stump speech that he's been using for 2 years, you could just see how much more comfortable he was in that. So he's got to take some time and really start to digest that. He would constantly, I noticed this, and I'm sure others did, constantly stop to smile. And it felt forced. It did not look like he was smiling organically. It looked like there was a note in his remarks, smile now. And it was very Ron DeSantis, very like, hi, smiling, very forced, very painful. I thought that, so you could just feel there was a little bit of that. He's got to work that stuff out. He's not a natural happy warrior. He's an angry warrior. And so they're trying to make that shift. And he's going to have to give this speech 10 times before he gets better at it. But I also thought, there's an interesting question. I thought his Carney thing was a little mailed in. They went hard and there was no other, but it amounted to like a real confession of fear. I thought it's a full concession that he's going to be the leader and they must be concerned about him.
Just interestingly, we've seen a 7-point shift in a week on this subject. In Ontario, we've been asking this, would you prefer a Liberal government led by Carney or a Conservative government led by Poilievre? And the numbers have moved in Carney's favor 7 points over the last 6 days.
So they obviously see that as well. And so he went right hard at him. But my quarrel was this. I think they have to find something more specific about Carney. They're just saying Carney carbon tax and Carney Trudeau. And I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe just the weight and the volume of it, and you throw a shitload of ads out. But it feels to me like you want, like the brilliance of Michael Ignatieff, if he didn't come back for you, was that they identified something that felt inherent about Ignatieff's political identity, and they blossomed it. And I don't know that they have anything it feels like a generic attack. They haven't found that inherent aha thing about Carney. So I'll wait to see that. And then the final thing to my mind is, despite the protestations in his speech, there's been a remarkable rush to consensus among everyone in this country now. Everyone's against the carbon tax. Everyone's against capital gains. Everyone's for middle-class tax cut. Everyone believes that we have to deal with energy infrastructure.
I want to see the person that stands up to defend an internal trade barrier.
Absolutely. So there's everyone. And so the question becomes, I think uniquely for the Conservatives, it seems weird because they still have a huge lead, don't get me wrong. But suddenly it's like, well, if everybody's peddling largely the same prescription and policies, then aren't people just picking on the basis of who they think is most likely and most trustworthy and most able to implement that stuff? If it's just who can fight Trump, doesn't that come down to, well, which one of these people do I actually think can fight Trump? And so I think one of the things that was hinted at in Poilievre's speech was it isn't that he's trying to figure out, well, what is the place that I can fight Trump on that the Liberals can't? And I'm not sure they've landed that just yet.
But you also said something important, which is trustworthy. And I think they'll go after that, flip-flopping, whatever they want to label it as. And I also think it's really easy to put Carney as completely out of touch, not even remotely understanding what life is like.
I don't know.
2025 for
maybe,
people. Not at all.
Maybe, but that's an unproven thesis that I think Conservatives want to believe. I'm not positive it's what people actually believe.
I think it's pretty easy to do that definition. I really do.
So let me throw something else in the mix here, because I think the thing that intrigued me most about the Poilievre rally, because it was incredibly professional and I expected that, and it was a smart speech and I expected that, but embedded in the speech is a major, major strategic judgment on their part, and it will be interesting to see how it plays out. So what do we know? We know that half of the conservative voting coalition likes Donald Trump, and that everybody who likes Donald Trump in Canada is voting conservative. Not every conservative likes Donald Trump, but every person who likes Donald Trump is voting conservative. They have now decided that they've staked their ground. Trump is bad. Trump is anti-Canada. We are going to fight Trump. And surely even somebody who's as big a tool as Maxime Bernier can see that opening. Isn't that possible?
I wondered that too. I wondered if it might. They clearly have said we feel secure enough on that front that
they were at the beginning of his tenure determined to stamp that out. Whether it was crushing them in by-elections or crowding them on policy, they were very attentive to that. But they have now opened up a flank. They now have voters that they're offside with. You're looking really skeptical, Deb, and you're entitled to look really skeptical. Tell me I'm full of shit.
Well, I'm not so sure you're full of shit, but I don't see it happening, particularly if we're into an election within weeks, which I think is highly likely. I don't see it happening. And I think a lot of people had a really bad experience last time out by shifting to another party further to the right. So I just don't see it happening. That's why I'm skeptical.
Okay. So what you're saying is you don't think it will happen and they don't think it will happen. So they've decided they can't expose that flank and it will be fine.
And there's parts in his language that still says, as the premier does, for example, we're better together, but holy crap, if you decide to go against us as you're talking about it, we're going to be there fighting you every step of the way. That's not our preferred course, but that's what will happen.
it is a wedge, but it's one that they've decided to embrace and run toward. I wonder if there's a corollary to your point, David.
Well, they couldn't win without doing what they're doing.
Right.
Right.
That's right.
They had to do what they're doing in order to win, but it does create it's just, I guess for looking at an organization that had zero vulnerability 2 months ago, now you see a couple. That's all.
And is there any risk that you get a few eruptions? You get people that are within their coalition who verbalize and speak out saying, I still you're going to get people who are off script. You're going to get people who say, well, I do think we got to be doing this and this and this. And Trump's right. And there's all those pictures of people in MAGA hats and all that kind of shit who sit in this caucus. So, where's what's her name? Lewis, right? She's going to pop up at some point for sure.
Right. Right. All right. Let's swing around to our blessings and curses and let everybody get back to Family Day. Deb,
So I got a
first?
blessing, and it's
Yeah.
to all the families of politicians, having been one myself on this family day. It's a shitty existence when you have either married into or have been born into a political family for a good chunk of years. So I send my blessing to all of them who work behind the scenes.
Absolutely.
I have a curse. My curse is to the network consortium or whatever they refer to themselves as now, the band of networks that put together the rules and structure around the debate. 6:30 to 8 p.m. is constructed solely for your benefit. It's because you don't want to interrupt Jeopardy or whatever the fuck. And I guess Jeopardy is interrupted, but you don't want to interrupt your primetime schedule. And in a time where there's increasing disengagement from the political process and democratic process, at a time when people don't pay as much attention to politics, and when media plays a far less instrumental role in election campaigns on a daily and weekly basis, I just think you should pick the time slot where there's likely to be the maximum number of people watching, and all other considerations for that one goddamn day every 4 years or thereabouts ought to be dismissed. So my curse is to the networks. I wish that we were watching this at a time when as many people as possible are watching, as opposed to struggling to get home after a snowstorm.
Absolutely. All right. My curse is inspired by a conversation I had with our mutual friend, Bill Fox. So I think Canadians have been surprised to find very little support or public reinforcement from allies around the world or from any people we consider to be friends in the international community to stand up and defend Canada. But one group of people particularly stands out: Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. 3 alleged great friends of Canada. 3 people that were present had great relationships with Canada. Through all this shit that Trump is putting us through and all this talk of absorbing us into their orbit, not one word from those 3 guys. And I think we should hear something from them. I think they are the people that are in a position to talk about what the Canada-U.S. relationship is and why Canada should be respected by the United States and its administration. And I agree with Bill. These guys should get up there and say something. All right.
Hear, hear.
That is our show for today. We'll be back tomorrow with a slightly shorter one, but we will have tomorrow. I can give you some exciting information because tonight is the leaders debate. Kyla Ranellenfitch from Relay Strategies will be joining us tomorrow morning with immediate, instant, real-time reaction to the debates that she is gathering tonight. We'll be able to see what viewers thought of the debates in real time as they watched it. So,
Breaking news from the top of NBC studios here.
So I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsor, CN, our original sponsor, the OREA, and our polling sponsor, Enbridge, for their assistance today. You two for joining us, and screw Jordan off. And
that's not enough credits. Hair, Mr. Reid's hair and makeup done by Olivia of Queen Street.
All right, we'll sign off there and see you tomorrow morning. Take care, folks.